My husband threw tantrums for months, slammed a sauce jar so hard it cracked, flipped the coffee table, and his mom said, "Boys will be boys." So I threw bigger ones back. I married Nathan after dating for 2 years, and everything was great until we moved in together. We had this nice little duplex with a big kitchen and a backyard where I grew tomatoes and peppers. Nathan worked from home doing consulting, and I worked at the veterinary clinic downtown. We split everything down the middle and took turns cooking dinner. Life was good until about 3 months after the wedding when I saw who Nathan really was. We were at the grocery store and I grabbed the wrong brand of pasta sauce. Nathan grabbed the jar from my hand and slammed it back on the shelf so hard it cracked. The store employee just stared at us. Nathan said the sauce had too much sugar and walked off like nothing happened. I bought the sauce anyway because we needed it for dinner. When we got home, Nathan saw the jar in the bag and threw it in the trash. Then he made himself a sandwich and went to his office. After that, the tantrums started happening all the time. If I bought the wrong coffee creamer, he'd pour the whole bottle down the sink while I was watching. If I forgot to record his show, he'd unplug the TV and carry it to the garage. If dinner wasn't ready when he wanted it, he'd take every pot and pan out of the cabinet and stack them on the counter. The worst was when I came home late from an emergency surgery at the clinic. Nathan had thrown every single pillow and blanket from our bed into the bathtub and turned on the shower. He said if I couldn't be home on time, I didn't deserve a comfortable bed. I slept on the couch that night while he sprawled across our king-size mattress. My friend Lisa kept telling me to leave, but I wanted to handle this myself first. Nathan had this whole routine where he'd throw his fit, storm off to his office, then come back an hour later acting like nothing happened. He'd ask what was for dinner or if I wanted to watch a movie. If I brought up what he did, he'd say I was being sensitive and making a big deal over nothing. One time I tried to talk to him about it calmly, and he threw his coffee mug at the wall. Not near me, but close enough that I jumped. Then he said I was being dramatic about a little noise. His mom came to visit and I tried to tell her what was happening. She watched Nathan flip the coffee table because I forgot to buy his protein bars, and she said boys will be boys. She actually said that. Then she told me her husband used to break plates when he was stressed and it was my job to keep Nathan happy. That's when I realized nobody was going to fix this but me. So I started matching his energy. When Nathan threw the remote at the wall because the game was buffering, I picked up his gaming headset and launched it out the back door into the garden. He ran outside and spent an hour looking for it in the dark. When he poured out my expensive shampoo because I took too long in the shower, I took his entire shelf of supplements and protein powder and dumped them in the kitchen trash. He had to dig through coffee grounds and old food to get them back. When he knocked all my makeup off the bathroom counter because I left a hair in the sink, I went to his office and swept everything off his desk onto the floor. His laptop survived, but his coffee went everywhere. Nathan started getting confused. He'd throw his tantrum and wait for me to clean up or apologize, but instead I'd throw a bigger one. He threw a book at the door. I threw 3. He slammed cabinets. I slammed them harder. He started yelling that I was crazy and out of control. I yelled back that I was just expressing my feelings as he did. The breaking point came when Nathan's boss called him for an important video meeting. Nathan was in his office, and I was in the kitchen making lunch. I accidentally dropped a pan, and Nathan came storming out screaming about the noise. So I grabbed every pan we owned and started dropping them one by one. Nathan's face turned this deep red color that started at his neck and spread up to his hairline. His laptop screen showed his boss Winston's face frozen mid-question, and I could hear the tinny voice coming through the speakers asking what all that noise was about. Nathan slammed the laptop shut so hard I thought the screen might crack. He started walking toward me with his hands balled up into fists at his sides, and for a second I thought about backing up or apologizing or doing something to defuse the situation like I always did. But I was still holding that big cast iron skillet in my hand, and something in me just refused to move. Nathan stopped about 3 feet away from me, and we just stared at each other while he breathed really hard through his nose. I could see something different in his eyes that I'd never seen before. Something that looked almost like fear. Like he suddenly realized I wasn't going to back down this time. He opened his mouth like he was going to yell at me, but nothing came out. Then he spun around and punched the hallway wall so hard his fist went straight through the drywall. The sound was this awful crunch, and then he was shaking his hand and cursing, and he walked straight to his office and slammed the door so hard the whole duplex shook. I heard the lock click from where I was standing in the kitchen. I put the pan down on the counter and my hands were shaking. All the other pans were scattered across the kitchen floor like some kind of crazy obstacle course. I started picking them up one by one and putting them back in the cabinet, and my heart was beating so fast I could feel it in my throat. Through the office door, I could hear Nathan talking on his phone, and his voice had this high panicked edge to it that I'd never heard before. I walked closer to the door and pressed my ear against it. He was telling someone that I'd lost my mind, that I'd ruined his important work call on purpose, that he didn't know what to do with me anymore. I realized he was talking to his mother. He kept saying things like, "She's out of control and I can't live like this, and you need to come over here and talk to her." I stepped back from the door and went to sit on the couch in the living room. My phone was on the coffee table and I opened it up to my photos. I'd been taking pictures of everything Nathan destroyed over the past few months without really thinking about why. There was the cracked sauce jar from the grocery store, the soaked bedding in the bathtub, my makeup scattered all over the bathroom floor, the dent in the wall from where he threw his coffee mug, the broken TV remote, my shampoo bottle empty in the sink. I had dozens of photos documenting every single one of his tantrums. Less than an hour later, I heard a key turning in our front door. Nathan must have given his mother a key without asking me because Lorraine just walked right in like she owned the place. She didn't even knock. She came into the living room where I was still sitting on the couch and stood there with her hands on her hips looking at me like I was a misbehaving child. She started in on this lecture about how a wife needs to respect her husband's work time and create a peaceful home environment and be supportive instead of destructive. She said Nathan had important responsibilities and I needed to understand that my behavior was affecting his career. I just sat there listening to her go on, and then I held up my phone. I started showing her the photos one by one without saying anything. The cracked sauce jar, the soaked bedding, my makeup everywhere, the wall damage, the empty bottles. She went quiet as she looked at each photo and her face got this pinched expression like she'd bitten into something sour. When I got to the last photo, she handed my phone back to me and said we both needed to grow up. Not just Nathan. Both of us. Like I was equally responsible for this mess we were living in. Nathan's office door opened and he came out looking all disheveled with his hair sticking up. He and Lorraine went into the kitchen and started having this quiet conversation, but the duplex is small enough that I could hear most of it from the living room. Lorraine told him he needed to handle his wife, and those exact words made my stomach turn. Nathan complained that I'd changed, that I used to be sweet and easy to get along with, that now I was impossible to live with. He didn't mention any of his own behavior, or the fact that he'd been throwing tantrums for months before I started fighting back. Lorraine said something about marriage being hard work, and both people needing to compromise, but then she told Nathan that men sometimes need to be firm with their wives. I wanted to get up and throw something at both of them, but I just sat there on the couch gripping the armrest so hard my knuckles turned white. After Lorraine finally left, Nathan came and sat on the opposite end of the couch from me. We sat there in complete silence for what felt like forever. I looked at the clock on the wall and watched the minutes tick by. 1 hour passed, then another. Neither of us said a single word because what was there even to say at this point? We'd crossed into some kind of territory where normal couple communication didn't work anymore. We couldn't just talk about our feelings or work through our problems like regular people because we'd been destroying each other's stuff and yelling and throwing things for months. The silence was so heavy, it felt like something physical sitting between us on the couch. Nathan kept clearing his throat like he was going to say something, but then he'd just shift his position and stay quiet. I stared at the wall where he'd punched the hole and thought about how we were going to have to fix that before the landlord saw it. I thought about how much money we'd wasted on replacing things we'd broken. I thought about how tired I was of living like this. That night, Nathan took a pillow and blanket from the closet and went to sleep in his office. I went to our bedroom and lay down on the bed, but I couldn't fall asleep. I kept staring at the ceiling thinking about everything that had happened. I'd matched Nathan's energy like I thought I was supposed to, like I was standing up for myself and refusing to be pushed around. But lying there in the dark, I realized that matching his tantrums hadn't fixed anything at all. I'd just proved that I could be as destructive as him. We were both living in a war zone that we'd created together. The duplex that used to feel like home now felt like a battlefield. My tomatoes and peppers in the backyard were probably dying because I hadn't had the energy to take care of them in weeks. Everything we'd built together was falling apart, and I didn't know how to stop it. I'd thought that fighting back would make Nathan see how awful his behavior was, but instead it just gave him an excuse to say I was crazy too. I finally fell asleep around 3 a.m, feeling more exhausted than I'd ever felt in my life. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee. I walked into the kitchen and found Nathan standing by the coffee maker with this big fake smile on his face. He asked me what I wanted for breakfast in this cheerful voice that sounded completely wrong after everything that had happened yesterday. I just stood there staring at him, trying to figure out if he was serious. I told him we needed to talk about what was happening to us, about the fighting and the destruction, and his mother walking into our house uninvited. Nathan's fake smile got even bigger, and he said there was nothing to talk about if I would just stop overreacting to everything. He said we could go back to normal if I would calm down and stop making problems where there weren't any. I felt something break inside me when he said that. Not in a dramatic way, just this quiet realization that Nathan genuinely believed none of this was his fault. He thought I was the problem. He thought if I would just go back to being quiet and accepting his tantrums, everything would be fine. I didn't say anything else to him. I just went back to the bedroom and got ready for work. I drove to the veterinary clinic downtown and walked in through the back entrance like I always did. My coworker Alyssa was in the break room making coffee, and she took one look at my face and asked if everything was okay at home. I opened my mouth to give her my usual response about how everything was fine, but instead I felt my eyes fill up with tears. Alyssa put down her coffee mug and took my arm and led me into the supply room. She closed the door behind us and I just started crying. Not pretty crying either, but the kind where you can't breathe right and your nose runs everywhere. I told her everything. About the pasta sauce at the grocery store, and Nathan throwing things and pouring out my shampoo and soaking our bedding in the bathtub. I told her about how I'd started fighting back and throwing bigger tantrums than his. I told her about the pans yesterday, and Nathan punching the wall and his mother showing up uninvited. Alyssa listened to the whole thing without interrupting once. When I finally stopped talking and wiped my face with a paper towel, Alyssa was quiet for a minute. Then she said very gently that what I was describing sounded like an abusive relationship. I started to argue with her because Nathan had never actually hit me, but she held up her hand. She said abuse wasn't just physical, and that destroying property and controlling behavior and creating a scary environment all counted. She said even though I was fighting back now, that didn't make it better. She said two people destroying each other wasn't a relationship. It was mutual destruction. She asked me if this was really how I wanted to live for the rest of my life. I stood there in the supply room surrounded by boxes of medical supplies and bags of dog food, and I realized I didn't have an answer to that question. I spent the rest of my shift at the clinic going through the motions of my job, while my brain kept replaying what Alyssa said about mutual destruction. I checked a beagle's ears for mites and thought about Nathan punching the wall. I gave a cat her vaccines and thought about me throwing pans during his work call. I cleaned exam rooms and thought about how we'd both become people I didn't recognize anymore. When I finally drove home that evening, I sat in the driveway for 10 minutes staring at our duplex. The lights were on in the kitchen and I could see Nathan moving around inside. Part of me wanted to just keep driving and never come back. But I got out of the car and walked to the front door because running away wouldn't fix anything either. I opened the door and stopped dead in the entryway. The kitchen table was set with our nice plates and cloth napkins we only used for company. Candles were burning in the middle of the table. Takeout containers from my favorite Thai restaurant were arranged on the counter, and the smell of pad Thai and green curry filled the whole house. Nathan came out of the kitchen wearing a smile that looked completely fake after everything that had happened. He asked if I was hungry and gestured at the table like he'd done something amazing. I just stood there holding my purse and staring at this scene he'd created. It was so obvious what he was doing. His mom probably taught him this exact move when he was growing up, watching his dad break plates and then buy flowers the next day. Make a big romantic gesture and pretend the bad stuff never happened. Smooth everything over with fancy food and candles instead of actually talking about the real problems. I walked past him to the bedroom and changed out of my scrubs while Nathan stayed in the kitchen. When I came back out, he was sitting at the table waiting for me with that same fake smile plastered on his face. I sat down across from him and he immediately started dishing pad Thai onto my plate. I watched him serve the food and arrange everything just right, and I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no hope, no sadness. Just this empty feeling like I was watching a stranger perform a play I'd seen too many times before. I put my fork down before even taking a bite and told Nathan we needed couples therapy. I said our marriage was falling apart and we needed professional help to fix it. Nathan actually laughed. Not a mean laugh exactly, but this dismissive sound like I'd said something ridiculous. He said therapy was for people with real problems like addiction or affairs. He said we just needed to stop being so dramatic about everything and get back to normal. I asked him what normal meant to him, and he said it meant me not overreacting when he got frustrated and him not having to walk on eggshells in his own home. I pointed out that he'd punched a hole in our wall yesterday, and that wasn't frustration. That was violence. Nathan rolled his eyes and said I was making it sound worse than it was. He said lots of guys punch walls when they're mad and it didn't mean anything. I sat there looking at him across the candlelit table with expensive takeout getting cold between us, and I realized he genuinely believed what he was saying. He actually thought punching walls and destroying my stuff and soaking our bedding in the tub was normal behavior that I should just accept. The romantic dinner wasn't an apology. It was a bribe to get me to go back to being quiet and manageable. I stood up from the table and told Nathan I was serious about therapy. He said he wasn't going to waste money on some therapist who would just take my side anyway. I went to the bedroom and closed the door while Nathan stayed at the table eating Thai food by himself. The next morning, I woke up to Nathan's voice coming through the bedroom wall. He was in his office talking loud enough that I could hear every word. I got up and pressed my ear against the wall between our bedroom and his office. Nathan was on the phone with his boss, and his voice had this fake, cheerful tone that made my skin crawl. I heard him say something about construction next door causing noise issues yesterday. He apologized for the disruption to the video meeting and promised it wouldn't happen again. There was a long pause where Nathan wasn't talking, and I figured his boss was responding. Then Nathan's voice got higher and more stressed. He said the construction was unexpected and he'd already filed a complaint with the building management. Another pause. Nathan said he understood the client had been on the call, and he took full responsibility for not warning everyone about potential noise. His voice was getting tighter, and I could tell his boss wasn't buying the construction story. Nathan spent the next hour on damage control calls. I got dressed and ready for work while listening to him talk to different people trying to fix his professional reputation. He called someone named Winston back and spent 20 minutes explaining his home office situation and promising his work quality wouldn't suffer. He called another colleague and asked them to smooth things over with a client who'd been on the disrupted call. Every conversation made him sound more desperate, and I realized his job might actually be in trouble because of what I'd done with the pans. Part of me felt guilty, but a bigger part of me thought about all the times Nathan had made me late for work or disrupted my life with his tantrums, and he never cared about the consequences for me. I was making coffee in the kitchen when someone knocked on our front door. I opened it and found our landlord standing there looking annoyed. He said he'd gotten noise complaints from both neighbors about crashing sounds and yelling coming from our duplex. He asked if he could come in and look around. I let him in because I didn't know what else to do. The landlord walked through our living room and immediately saw the hole Nathan had punched in the hallway wall. He stopped and stared at it for a long time. Then he kept walking and noticed the cabinet door in the kitchen hanging crooked where the hinge had broken during one of our fights. He opened the cabinet and the door came completely off in his hand. The landlord set the broken cabinet door on the counter and turned to look at me. He asked very directly if he needed to be concerned about his property. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. Nathan came out of his office right then, and the landlord's whole face changed. He asked Nathan what was going on with all the damage and noise complaints. Nathan immediately switched into this charming, friendly mode that made me want to throw up. He smiled at the landlord and said everything was fine. He said we'd had some minor accidents, but he was planning to repair everything himself this weekend. He put his hand on my shoulder like we were this happy couple, and I had to force myself not to pull away. The landlord looked at Nathan's hand on my shoulder and then looked at my face. He asked me directly if I felt safe in this house. I froze. Nathan's hand tightened on my shoulder. The landlord kept looking at me waiting for an answer, and I couldn't figure out what to say. If I said no, what would happen? Would the landlord call the police? Would Nathan get even angrier? If I said yes, was I lying? Did I actually feel safe here anymore? I finally said I was fine in this quiet voice that didn't sound convincing even to me. The landlord didn't look like he believed me, but he couldn't force me to say anything else. Nathan walked the landlord to the door, still being all friendly and charming. He promised again to fix everything and keep the noise down. The landlord handed Nathan a written warning about the noise complaints and property damage. He said any more problems, and he'd start eviction proceedings. Nathan took the paper and kept smiling until the landlord left. The second the door closed, Nathan's fake smile disappeared. Requested Reds is on Spotify now. Check out link in the description or comments. He turned to me and started yelling about how I'd embarrassed him and made us look like trashy people who couldn't handle our problems. He said the landlord probably thought he was some kind of abuser now because of how I acted. I pointed out that he literally punched a wall yesterday, and the landlord could see the evidence. Nathan said that was different because I'd provoked him by dropping the pans during his meeting. He said if I hadn't started that whole thing, none of this would have happened. I told him he'd been throwing tantrums and breaking stuff for months before I ever fought back. Nathan said I was twisting everything around and making him sound like a bad guy when he was just reacting to my behavior. We stood in the hallway yelling at each other until I couldn't take it anymore and went to the guest room and slammed the door. That night, I got ready for bed in the guest room. I'd brought my pillow and some blankets in there earlier. I was just getting under the covers when I heard Nathan in the hallway. The guest room door opened and Nathan walked in. He didn't say anything, just went straight to the bed and started pulling the mattress off the frame. I asked him what he was doing and he said if I wanted to sleep separately, then I could sleep on the floor or the couch. He dragged the mattress out of the guest room and down the hall to his office. I heard him shoving furniture around to make room for it. I stood in the empty guest room looking at the bare bed frame and felt something break inside me that hadn't broken before. This wasn't anger or destruction during a fight. This was cold, calculated punishment because I'd tried to set a boundary. I grabbed my pillow and went to the living room couch. I lay there in the dark, listening to Nathan moving around in his office and thought about how we'd gotten to this point. I thought about the grocery store and the pasta sauce, and how that first tantrum should have been a warning sign. I thought about all the times I'd made excuses for him, or tried to fix things myself instead of leaving. I thought about how I'd started matching his tantrums, thinking it would make him see how awful his behavior was. But instead, it just gave him ammunition to say I was crazy too. The next day at work, my friend Ellie found me in the break room. She'd heard from Alyssa that things were bad at home. Ellie asked if I wanted to come stay at her place for a few days. She had a spare room and said I could have some space to think about what I wanted to do. I sat there with my coffee getting cold in my hands and seriously considered taking her up on it. It would be so easy to just pack a bag and leave for a while. But then I thought about Nathan staying in our duplex acting like he'd won something. I thought about how I'd be the one adjusting and accommodating again while he got to keep his space and his routine. I told Ellie thanks, but I wasn't leaving my own home. Nathan was the one with the problem, and I was tired of being the one who had to leave or change or fix things. Ellie looked worried, but she said she understood. She made me promise to call her anytime, day or night, if I needed help. I promised and went back to work, but I kept thinking about her offer all day. Part of me wondered if I was being stupid by staying. But another part of me was just so tired of running away from problems or trying to make myself smaller, so other people could be comfortable. When I got home that evening, Nathan's office door was closed and locked. I could hear him typing and talking on the phone. I made myself dinner and ate alone at the kitchen table. Nathan stayed in his office until after I went to bed on the couch. The next few days followed the same pattern. Nathan worked long hours with his door locked, and I went to work and came home and we barely saw each other. When we did pass in the hallway, we didn't speak. We were living like hostile roommates who happened to be married. I'd wake up on the couch and hear Nathan already in his office. I'd come home and he'd be in there with the door locked. We stopped cooking meals together. We stopped talking about our days. We stopped existing in the same space except for these brief, awkward moments in the hallway where we'd both look away and keep walking. I realized Nathan was avoiding me as much as I was avoiding him. Neither of us knew how to fix what we'd broken, and neither of us wanted to be the first one to try. So we just lived in this Cold War silence that felt worse than the yelling and destruction had been. I worked a late emergency surgery on a cat who'd eaten something toxic. By the time I finished, it was almost midnight. I drove home exhausted and just wanting to collapse on the couch. I unlocked the front door and walked into the dark house. I flipped on the kitchen light and noticed something different right away. There was a new lock on Nathan's office door. Not just the regular door lock, but one of those deadbolts you need a key for. I walked over and tried the handle, and it didn't budge. Then I went to make myself something to eat and found another new lock on the pantry door. I stood there staring at the lock on the pantry where we kept all our food. Nathan came out of his office and I asked him what he was doing. He said since I couldn't be trusted not to disturb his work, he was protecting his space and his food. I asked him if he was seriously locking up our food, and he said it was his food since he'd bought most of it. He said I could buy my own groceries and keep them somewhere else. Then he went back in his office and locked the new deadbolt behind him. I stood in the kitchen staring at the locked pantry door for a long time after Nathan went back to his office. My stomach growled because I'd worked through lunch at the clinic and now I couldn't even get to my own food. I walked to the garage and grabbed my toolbox from the shelf. Then I went straight to Nathan's office door and unscrewed the router from the wall jack. I unplugged the modem too and wrapped all the cords around both devices. Nathan's door stayed locked while I carried everything out to my car. I popped the trunk and put the router and modem inside, then locked it and took my keys with me back into the house. About 20 minutes later, Nathan came storming out of his office yelling about the internet being down. I was sitting on the couch scrolling through my phone and I told him the internet was fine, just in a safe place. He demanded to know where it was, and I said he could have it back when he unlocked the pantry. Nathan's face went red and he started pacing back and forth in the living room. He pulled out his phone and I watched him turn on his hotspot and connect his laptop to it. He gave me this smug look like he'd won something and went back to his office. I ordered pizza on my phone since I still couldn't get to any real food. The next morning, Nathan was already in his office when I left for work. I could hear him on a video call talking to someone about quarterly projections. That evening when I got home, he was still in there, but I noticed he kept coming out to check his phone. He'd look at the screen, mutter something, then go back to his office. This happened 3 more times before dinner. Finally, around 8 o'clock, he knocked on the living room wall to get my attention. I looked up from my phone and he asked where the router was. I reminded him about the pantry lock and he said that was different because the food was his. I said the internet was mine then since I paid half the bill. He went back to his office and slammed the door. The next day I came home to find a package on the porch. Nathan must have been watching for it because he grabbed it before I even got my keys out. He took it straight to his office and I heard him ripping open the box. An hour later, I tried to connect to our Wi-Fi network and it was gone. Instead, there was a new network called Nathan's Network and it was password protected. I tried a few obvious passwords, but none of them worked. At work the next day, I was sitting in the break room watching videos on my phone during lunch. Alyssa came in to make coffee and noticed I was using my data instead of the clinic Wi-Fi. She asked why, and I told her about the separate internet networks at home. Alyssa stopped pouring her coffee and just stared at me. She set the pot down very carefully and sat across from me at the table. She said very quietly that what I was describing wasn't normal. She said I was a smart and capable person who didn't have to live like this. I told her I knew it wasn't normal, but I wasn't going to let Nathan push me around anymore. Alyssa reached across the table and put her hand on mine. She said matching his crazy didn't make me strong. It just made me participate in something that was destroying me. I pulled my hand back and said I had to get back to work. I avoided Alyssa for the rest of the day because I didn't want to hear what she was saying even though I knew she was right. Nathan started missing deadlines at work. I could hear him on stressed phone calls with his boss through his office door. One afternoon, he was in there for over an hour and I heard him saying he'd have everything done by end of day. That evening, his office door flew open and Nathan came out looking furious. He said Winston had called him in for a serious talk about his performance. He said his boss was threatening to put him on a performance improvement plan. Nathan stood in the hallway and yelled that this was all my fault for being difficult and making his home life so stressful he couldn't focus on work. I was sitting on the couch and I said nobody forced him to spend all his energy on revenge tactics instead of his actual job. Nathan grabbed his briefcase from beside the door and threw it across the room. It hit the wall right next to the hole he'd punched before and made a new dent in the drywall. The briefcase fell to the floor and papers scattered everywhere. There was a knock on the door 10 minutes later. Nathan and I both froze and looked at each other. I got up and opened it to find our landlord standing there with a clipboard. He did not look happy. He said the neighbors on both sides had reported another loud crash and he was done with warnings. He handed me a formal written notice on official letterhead. The notice said any more property damage or disturbances would result in eviction proceedings. He asked both of us to sign it to acknowledge we'd received it. Nathan came to the door and we both signed our names on the form. The landlord took it back and said he'd owned this duplex for 15 years without any problems until we moved in. He looked at both of us and said whatever we were doing to each other needed to stop or we needed to leave. Then he walked back to his car and drove away. Nathan went back to his office without saying anything. I sat on the couch and looked at the 2 holes in the wall and the scattered papers on the floor. I thought about the locked pantry and the separate internet networks, and the way we couldn't even be in the same room anymore. I grabbed my keys and went out to my car. I sat in the driveway with the engine off just staring at the duplex. An hour went by and I still couldn't make myself go back inside. The house had become this place where everything felt like a battle and I was tired all the time. I wasn't afraid Nathan would hit me because he never had. But the whole environment had turned toxic and every day felt like walking through a war zone. I pulled out my phone and just sat there holding it, not sure who to call or what to say. I ended up calling Ellie around 9 that night, still sitting in my car with the engine off. She picked up on the second ring and I could hear her TV playing in the background. I told her everything about the landlord's notice and the separate internet networks, and how Nathan and I were basically living like enemies in the same house. Ellie listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she said I could come stay at her place whenever I needed to, that her couch was always available. Then she got quiet for a second before saying, maybe it was time to talk to a lawyer just to understand my options. I thanked her and hung up, then sat there staring at my phone for another 20 minutes before going inside. The next morning, I looked up divorce attorneys during my lunch break at the clinic. I told myself I was just gathering information, not actually planning to leave. I found someone named Patricia Chen who had good reviews and availability that week. I made the appointment for Thursday afternoon and didn't tell Nathan about it. When Thursday came, I left work early and drove to her office in a building downtown. The waiting room had uncomfortable chairs and magazines from 6 months ago. Patricia called me back after 10 minutes and we sat in her office with a big window overlooking the parking lot. She asked about my marriage and I gave her the basic facts about Nathan's tantrums and my retaliation. She took notes on a yellow legal pad and asked if Nathan had ever physically hurt me. I said no, he'd never hit me or anything like that. Then she asked about emotional abuse and I froze because I didn't know how to answer that question. Patricia put down her pen and explained that destroying property and controlling behavior and creating a hostile environment all counted as forms of abuse even without physical violence. She said what I was describing fit a pattern she'd seen many times before. She pulled out some pamphlets about domestic abuse and support resources, then told me to think carefully about whether I wanted to try to save this marriage or protect myself by leaving. I took the pamphlets and stuffed them in my purse, then drove home in a daze thinking about the word abuse and whether it really applied to my situation. I walked into the duplex to find a strange man working in our kitchen. He was on a ladder patching the hole Nathan had punched in the wall, and there were tools spread out on the counter. Nathan came out of his office when he heard me come in and explained that he'd hired a handyman to fix all the damage before the landlord came back. The handyman glanced between us and kept working, but I could tell he felt uncomfortable. He probably sensed the tension radiating off both of us. I went to the bedroom without saying anything to Nathan and closed the door. Later that evening, after the handyman left, Nathan found me in the kitchen making dinner. He told me in this cold, formal voice that he was fixing everything so we wouldn't get evicted, speaking to me like I was a business partner instead of his wife. I realized we hadn't had a real conversation in over a week, just these tactical exchanges about practical matters. He asked what time I'd be home tomorrow, and I told him my usual time. Then he nodded and went back to his office. I ate dinner alone at the table, looking at the freshly patched wall. At work the next day, Alyssa cornered me in the supply room and asked how things were going at home. I tried to brush her off, but she wouldn't let it go. She said I looked exhausted and stressed and she was worried about me. I finally admitted that Nathan and I were barely speaking and living like hostile roommates. Alyssa said even if Nathan wouldn't go to couples counseling, I needed to talk to someone because this situation was clearly taking a toll. She pulled up a therapist's website on her phone and showed me the profile for someone named Heidi Molina, who worked with relationship issues and trauma. I took a picture of the screen and promised Alyssa I'd think about it. I called Heidi's office that afternoon and made an appointment for the following Tuesday. The receptionist asked what I wanted to work on, and I said relationship problems, which felt like a massive understatement. When Tuesday came, I left work at 4 and drove to Heidi's office across town. She met me in the waiting room, a woman in her 50s with gray hair and kind eyes. Her office had soft lighting and comfortable chairs and a box of tissues on the side table. She asked me to tell her what brought me in, and I started talking about Nathan's tantrums and my retaliation, and everything that had happened over the past months. Saying it all out loud to a stranger made me realize how completely abnormal our situation had become. Heidi asked what I wanted to get out of therapy, and I opened my mouth to say I wanted to fix my marriage, but the words wouldn't come out. I sat there staring at the tissue box and realized I didn't even know if I wanted to save my marriage anymore. Heidi didn't push me for an answer. Instead, she started asking about Nathan's behavior patterns and my responses to them. She explained that what I was describing followed a classic abuse cycle, even though Nathan wasn't hitting me. She said my retaliation was a trauma response to feeling powerless in my own home. Then she said something that hit me hard, that matching his destructiveness didn't give me power back. It just made me participate in my own harm. I left that session feeling like someone had taken everything I thought I knew about my situation and turned it upside down. I kept seeing Heidi twice a week after that first appointment. Over the next few sessions, things started getting clearer in my head. I'd been so focused on proving I wouldn't be pushed around that I'd lost sight of whether this relationship was even worth fighting for. Nathan hadn't changed at all since I started matching his tantrums. He'd just gotten sneakier about his control tactics, like locking the pantry and creating separate internet networks. I was exhausted from constantly being on guard in my own home. Heidi helped me see that I deserved better than living in a war zone, whether I stayed with Nathan or not. 3 weeks into therapy, Nathan's mother called me directly for the first time in weeks. I was sitting in my car outside the clinic after work when her name popped up on my screen. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. My husband wanted my sister to be his wife for a day. His brother wanted me for life. My husband Damien had this way of dropping bombs like he was asking me to pass the salt. We were eating dinner, pasta I'd made after a 12-hour day at the firm because Damien said he was too tired to cook even though he'd been home since 3. I was twirling spaghetti around my fork when he said, "So my 10-year reunion is next month and I need Nikki to come with me." I kept chewing because I assumed I'd misheard him. Nikki was my younger sister, prettier than me by conventional standards, thinner than me by 15 pounds, and unemployed by choice for the last 2 years because she was finding herself on my dime. I paid her rent. I paid her car insurance. I paid for the highlights she got every 6 weeks because she said dark roots made her feel less confident. I didn't realize I was also paying for her to attend my husband's high school reunion too. I swallowed my pasta and said, "Why would Nikki be coming to your reunion?" Damien didn't even look up from his phone. "Because I need her there," he said. Like that explained everything. I set my fork down and waited for him to elaborate because surely there was more to this sentence. There wasn't. He just kept scrolling through whatever app had his attention more than I did. "Damien," I said. And he finally looked up with that expression he always wore when I was about to inconvenience him with questions. "Why do you need my sister at your high school reunion instead of your actual wife?" He sighed like I was being exhausting, like I was the one who'd just said something insane over pasta. "Because I told everyone I married her," he said. "Back when we first started dating. My buddies met her once at that barbecue and they assumed she was my girlfriend. I never corrected them." I stared at him. I kept staring at him. I was waiting for the part where he laughed and said he was kidding, where this became some weird joke I didn't find funny but could at least categorize as humor. That part never came. "You told your friends you married my sister," I repeated slowly, making sure I understood the words coming out of his mouth. "It's not a big deal," he said, picking his fork back up like we were done discussing this. "It was easier than explaining. And honestly, babe, you know how those guys are. They're shallow. If they remember Nikki being hot and they've spent 10 years thinking I locked that down. I can't show up with someone different and explain that actually I married the other one. The other one. I'd graduated top of my class at law school. I'd made partner at 33. I'd bought us this house, the cars in our driveway, and every piece of furniture Damien was currently sitting on. And I was the other one. I could feel something cold spreading through my chest, but I kept my voice steady because that's what I did. I stayed calm. I was reasonable. I didn't make scenes. "So your solution," I said, "is to bring my sister as your fake wife to a reunion full of people I'll never meet, and I'm supposed to just be okay with that?" Damien reached across the table and grabbed my hand like he was comforting me through my own confusion. "It's one night," he said, squeezing my fingers. "Nobody will ever know. These people don't matter. I'll make it up to you, I promise. We'll do a nice dinner after, just us. Whatever restaurant you want." He smiled at me with those blue eyes that used to make my stomach flip, and I realized something that should have been obvious years ago. He thought I was stupid. He thought I was so desperate to keep him happy that I'd agree to anything if he just promised me a nice dinner afterward. And the worst part? He was probably right. He'd been training me to accept less since the day we met. "I don't know, Damien," I said, and I watched his face change from charm to irritation in half a second. "It just feels weird. Why can't you just tell them the truth?" He pulled his hand back. "Because I've been lying for 10 years, Carissa. What am I supposed to say now? Hey guys, funny story, I actually married her boring older sister who works all the time." That's humiliating. Boring, older, works all the time. Each word landed like a small punch to the chest, but I didn't react because I never reacted. I just absorbed it and kept functioning. That was my role in this marriage. Provider, absorber, the other one. "Besides," Damien continued, "Nikki already said yes. She's excited about it. She said it sounds fun." I blinked. "You already asked her? Before asking me?" He shrugged. "I needed to make sure she was available first. Logistics. My sister had agreed to pretend to be my husband's wife. My sister, who I'd been financially supporting for 2 years, who called me crying every month about how hard her life was, who I'd given everything to because that's what big sisters did. She'd said yes to this without even calling me first. Damien must have seen something in my face because his expression softened into that fake concern he was so good at. "Babe, don't be upset. Nikki said you should be flattered that she's willing to help. She's doing this for us. For you, really. So I can network and maybe finally land something better than that cashier job you're always complaining about." I wasn't complaining about his cashier job. I was complaining about the fact that he'd had 4 cashier jobs in 3 years and quit each one because his managers didn't respect him. I was complaining about funding his life while he figured out what he wanted to be when he grew up at 34 years old. But somehow that had become me being unsupportive. Somehow everything always became my fault. "One night," Damien said again, watching me carefully now, seeing just how much more he needed to push. "Nobody gets hurt. And then we never talk about it again." "Okay." I nodded. I agreed to let Nikki pretend to be Damien's wife for one night at his reunion. I told myself it was harmless, just an embarrassing lie he needed help covering up. But something about how quickly Nikki said yes kept nagging at me. How she already knew the date before I did. How comfortable Damien seemed asking his wife to step aside for her own sister. I decided I wasn't going to sit back and watch from the sidelines. I was going to insert myself right into their little rehearsals and see exactly how they acted when the wife they were replacing was standing in the room. I decided to help them rehearse because I wanted to see their faces when the wife they were pretending didn't exist walked into the room and offered to participate. I wanted to watch them squirm. I wanted Nikki to look guilty and Damien to stumble over his words, and both of them to realize how insane this whole situation was. So I came home early from work the next day and found them in my living room going over their story, and I said, "I figured I could help. Give you feedback on what looks believable." They barely looked up. Damien said, "Sure, babe," and went right back to whatever Nikki was saying. I sat down in the chair across from them and waited for the awkwardness to settle in. It never did. They just kept going like I was part of the furniture in the house I paid for with money I earned while both of them contributed nothing. "Okay, so when they ask how we met," Damien said, leaning toward Nikki with his elbows on his knees, "I'll say I saw you across the room at a mutual friend's birthday party, and I knew right then I had to talk to you." I felt my whole body go rigid. That was how Damien and I met. I was standing by the window, and he walked up and said I looked like I was plotting my escape, and I laughed and we talked for 3 hours, and he asked for my number before I left. "Wait," I said, and they both glanced at me like I'd interrupted something important. "That's our story. That's how you and I actually met. The night that started our entire relationship." Damien shrugged. "Exactly. I already know it by heart, so I won't mess up the details. Makes it easier. You want to use the story of how you met your wife to pretend you married someone else. You don't see anything wrong with that?" "Not really. It's practical." I turned to Nikki. "And you're okay with this? Pretending you had the night that I actually had? The night I've told you about a dozen times because I thought my sister would care about the most important moment of my life?" Nikki examined her nails. "I mean, it's not like you own a story, Carissa. Things happen to lots of people the same way. It's not that deep. It happened to me, specifically. With him, your brother-in-law. And now we're borrowing it for one night. You'll get it back." She said it like I was being stingy with a sweater. Damien turned back to Nikki like the conversation was over. "So after the party, I texted you the next day and asked if you wanted to get coffee. And I said yes, but I made you wait 3 days before we actually went," Nikki said, smiling at him like this was a fond memory she actually had. "Because I didn't want to seem too eager. That was exactly what I did. I made him wait because my roommate told me 3 days was the minimum for not looking desperate." Nikki knew this story because I told her years ago, late at night, when I thought I was sharing something precious with my little sister. And now she was reciting it back to my husband like it belonged to her. "I told you that story in confidence," I said to Nikki, "when we were close. When I thought you actually cared about my life." Damien let out a loud sigh and turned to face me fully. "You know what this is really about? You're so used to being the boss at work that you can't let anyone else have anything without controlling it. Everything has to go through Carissa. Everything has to be approved by Carissa. We can't even have a conversation without you hovering over it like a manager. This isn't about control. This is about you giving away my memories. See, there you go again. Your memories, your story, your life. He shook his head. Not everything belongs to you just because you were present for it. I was there too. It's my story as much as yours, and I can tell it however I want. Nikki nodded. He has a point. You can't copyright a relationship. I tried a different approach. Okay, well, what about the proposal? What are you going to say when people ask about that? Rooftop restaurant downtown, Damien said without hesitation. I had the ring hidden in my jacket pocket all night, and I was so nervous I could barely eat. Then after dessert, I got down on one knee and the whole restaurant clapped. My engagement, my proposal. The happiest night of my life reduced to a script for my sister to memorize. That's literally what you did for me, I said, and my voice cracked in a way I hated. That's my proposal. I cried. You cried. The waiter brought us free champagne. I called my mom from the restaurant because I couldn't wait to tell her. That memory is mine, Damien. Ours. How can you just hand it to someone else? Damien's face twisted into something ugly. You know what, Carissa? You've always been jealous of Nikki. Ever since you were kids. She got more attention, she got more dates, she got more everything. And you've never gotten over it. He gestured at my sister. This isn't about the reunion. This is about you still competing with her after 30 years. I'm not competing with anyone. I'm asking why my husband is teaching my sister how to be me. Because she's willing to help without making it a federal case. He turned to Nikki with a softened expression. Unlike some people. Nikki reached over and squeezed his arm supportively. It's okay. She doesn't get it. You think this is easy for me? Damien's voice rose suddenly, like he was the one being wronged. I have to go back to these people and lie to their faces all night. I have to pretend my whole life turned out different than it did. But sure, let's focus on how hard this is for you. Let's make it about Carissa's feelings like we always do. I stared at him. You created this situation. You're the one who lied for 10 years. And I'm trying to fix it without blowing up my entire social network. But you can't give me one night. After everything I do around here, you can't give me one single night without making it weird. 1. What exactly do you do around here? The question hung in the air. Damien's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, Nikki jumped in. He supports you emotionally. He's here when you come home from your stressful job. He manages the house while you're working all the time. She said it like she was listing his accomplishments at a job interview. Not everything is about money, Carissa. I looked around at the house I paid for, the furniture I bought, the electricity and water and internet that came out of my account every month. Damien hadn't had a steady job in 3 years. The last time he managed the house, he forgot to pay the water bill and we got a shut-off notice. I already talked to Mom about this, Nikki added casually. She said you'd probably overreact. She thinks it's actually kind of sweet that Damien cared enough about his friend's opinions to keep up the story this long. You talked to our mother about this before I even knew it was happening? I needed advice. She gets it. I don't know why you can't. Damien seized on this immediately. See? Your own mother understands. Your own sister is willing to help. The only person with a problem is you. He paused and tilted his head. What does that tell you? I didn't have an answer. Or I had too many answers and none of them would come out right. Let's just keep practicing, Nikki said, dismissing me entirely. We don't have that much time left. They went back to it like I'd given them permission to continue robbing me in broad daylight. Damien walked Nikki through our first anniversary and the trip we took to the coast, and the time I surprised him at work with lunch. All things that happened to me. All moments I thought belonged to us. At one point I tried to interject again, to point out that the restaurant on our anniversary was French, not Italian, and Damien cut me off. Oh, here we go, he said, pitching his voice high in a cruel imitation of mine. Actually, Damien, that's not exactly right. Actually, Damien, you're telling it wrong. Actually, Damien, let me correct you in front of everyone like I always do. He looked at Nikki and they both laughed at me in my house. I was just trying to help you get the details right, I said quietly. We don't need your help, Nikki said, still smiling from the impression. We've got it handled. Why don't you go do some work or something? Isn't that what you're good at? I told myself to let it go. This was my husband and my sister. They were just stressed about the reunion. None of it meant anything. I was being sensitive. I went upstairs to change and gave myself 5 minutes to calm down. I washed my face, took deep breaths, told myself I was overreacting just like everyone kept saying. I was halfway down the stairs when I heard Nikki giggle. Not her normal laugh, but something softer. Private. I stopped on the landing and looked through the railing, and what I saw made my whole body go cold. Damien had his hand on Nikki's face. His thumb was tracing her cheekbone, and she was leaning into it with her eyes half closed and their faces were inches apart. They were about to kiss. My husband and my sister in my living room in my house. I must have made a sound because they jumped apart like someone fired a gun. Nikki's face went red and Damien's hands flew up and they both started talking at once. It's not what it looks like, Damien said. We were just rehearsing, Nikki said. In case anyone asks about us being affectionate. I stood on the stairs looking down at them, and they looked back up with matching panic, trying very hard to become innocents. Right, I said slowly. Rehearsal. Damien's face relaxed into relief. Exactly. We got carried away practicing. It didn't mean anything. Nikki nodded quickly. We have to look like a real couple. That's literally all it was. I walked downstairs and sat back in my chair and watched them watch me, waiting to see what I would do. And I did nothing. I let them think I bought it, because I needed time to figure out what was actually happening before I said something I couldn't take back. But I wasn't overreacting anymore. Something was very wrong and I wasn't going to sleep on it. I wasn't going to give them time to align their stories or practice their excuses. Damien first while the panic was still fresh. Then Nikki, alone, without him there to feed her lines. If neither of them cracked, I'd find someone else in his life who'd seen what I was too blind to notice. Someone who owed him nothing. Someone with no reason to protect him. The truth was coming out tonight one way or another. Nikki left an hour later and I followed Damien upstairs without saying a word. He went into the bathroom to brush his teeth like nothing had happened. Like I hadn't just watched him almost kiss my sister. Like this was any other regular night in our marriage. I waited until he came out and then I stepped in front of the bedroom door. "Move," he said. "No." He blinked at me like I'd spoken another language. In 10 years of marriage, I'd never blocked a door. I'd never stood in his way. And I'd never been anything but accommodating and reasonable and easy to walk around. "Carissa, I'm tired. Move. You're not sleeping until you tell me what's going on with you and Nikki." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "We already explained that. It was rehearsal. You said you understood." I lied. I don't understand anything. I don't understand why my husband had his hands on my sister's face. I don't understand why she was leaning into him like she'd done it 100 times before. I don't understand why you two looked more comfortable together than you've looked with me in years. Damien tried to step around me and I moved with him. His jaw tightened. "You're being crazy right now. You know that, right? You're acting like a crazy person. Then explain it to me so I stop being crazy. Tell me one thing that makes sense." "I already told you. We were practicing looking like a couple. That's literally all it was." "Then why did you jump apart like I caught you doing something wrong? If it was just practice, you would have laughed it off. You wouldn't have panicked." He threw his hands up. "What do you want me to say? That I'm sleeping with your sister? Is that what you need to hear so you can feel justified in this little meltdown you're having? Are you?" The question hung between us. Damien stared at me and I stared back, and for 3 seconds neither of us breathed. "I can't believe you'd even ask me that." His voice went quiet and wounded like I was the one who'd hurt him. "After all these years together. After everything we've built. You're going to stand there and accuse me of sleeping with Nikki because we got a little too into character during a rehearsal?" You didn't answer the question. "Because the question is insane." He was yelling now and I didn't flinch. "No, Carissa. No, I'm not sleeping with your sister. Happy? Can I go to bed now?" He tried to push past me and I grabbed his arm. My fingers dug into his bicep and he stopped moving and looked down at my hand like he couldn't believe I was touching him without permission. "Let go of me. Not until you look me in the eyes and tell me there's nothing between you two." He yanked his arm free and his whole face changed. His lip curled up on one side and his eyes went flat and cold, and he looked at me like I was something stuck to the bottom of his shoe. "You want to know what there is between us? Relief. That's what. Relief that I get to spend time with someone who doesn't interrogate me every time I breathe. Relief that I get to be around a woman who actually makes me feel good instead of making me feel like a failure every single day. I have never called you a failure. You don't have to. It's in everything you do. The way you sigh when you pay the bills. The way you mention your job every 5 minutes. The way you look at me like I'm a problem you're too tired to solve." He stepped closer and his voice dropped. "Nikki doesn't look at me like that. Nikki thinks I'm worth something. Nikki doesn't pay your bills. See? There it is. Everything comes back to money with you. You can't even have a conversation without reminding me that you're the one with the checkbook. I'm reminding you that I'm the one with the checkbook because you seem to have forgotten who funds your life while you spend your days rehearsing romance with my sister." Damien's nostrils flared and his mouth pressed into a thin, hard line. "You know what? I'm done. If you can't trust me after 10 years, then maybe we shouldn't be married anymore." The words landed exactly how he meant them to. A threat. A weapon. The nuclear option he knew I'd been avoiding my entire marriage. "Is that what you want?" I asked. "Divorce? I want a wife who doesn't treat me like a suspect. If you can't be that, then yeah. Maybe divorce is exactly what I want." He pushed past me, and this time I let him. He grabbed a pillow and a blanket from the closet and walked out without looking back. I heard him go downstairs. Heard the couch creak as he threw himself onto it. Heard the TV turn on because even in the middle of a fight, he couldn't go 5 minutes without a screen. I stood in our bedroom doorway and realized something important. He hadn't denied it. He'd yelled. He'd deflected. He'd threatened divorce. But he never once looked me in the eyes and said there was nothing between him and Nikki. He couldn't. Because there was. I grabbed my keys and my purse and walked out the front door without telling him where I was going. He didn't ask. He didn't even look up from the TV. Nikki's apartment was 20 minutes away. I knew the route by heart because I'd driven there dozens of times with groceries when she said she couldn't afford food, with furniture when she said her place looked too empty, with a check for her security deposit when she first moved in, because she'd blown through her savings on a trip to Cabo with friends. She called me crying 2 years ago, saying she was about to be homeless. I co-signed her lease. I covered her security deposit. I set up automatic transfers for her rent, because she said dealing with money stressed her out. 2 years. $24,000. Plus her car insurance. Plus her phone bill. plus random checks whenever she said she was struggling. I added it up once and stopped because the number made me sick. And the whole time I was funding her life, she was using that freedom to sleep with my husband. Every hour I spent at work to cover her bills was an hour she spent in my house with Damien. I parked in front of her building and took the stairs 2 at a time. It was almost 11 at night and I didn't care. I banged on her door hard enough that her neighbor opened theirs to see what was happening. "Nikki, open the door, now." I heard movement inside, footsteps, then her voice, high and nervous. "Carissa? What are you doing here? Open the door or I'll keep knocking until someone calls the cops." The lock clicked and the door opened 3 inches. Nikki's face appeared in the gap looking pale and scared. "It's late. Can we talk tomorrow?" "No." I pushed the door hard and she stumbled backward as I walked into the apartment I funded. "We're talking right now. You can't just barge in here. I pay your rent. I can do whatever I want." I looked around at the furniture I'd helped her pick out. The TV I'd bought her for Christmas. The couch where she probably sat texting my husband while I was at work paying for all of it. "How long?" Nikki wrapped her arms around herself. "How long what? Don't play dumb with me. How long have you been sleeping with Damien?" "I'm not sleeping with Damien. I told you it was just rehearsal. Why won't you believe me?" "Because I saw your face when he touched you. I saw how natural it looked. That wasn't acting, Nikki. That was muscle memory. That was something you've done so many times your body did it without thinking. You're imagining things." "Am I? Then explain why you know so much about my husband. Explain why you two have inside jokes I've never heard. Explain why he defends you more than he's ever defended me." Nikki's eyes darted toward her phone on the counter, looking for backup, looking for Damien to tell her what to say. "He's not coming to save you," I said. "I left him on the couch. It's just you and me. Sister to sister. Tell me the truth." "There's nothing to tell." "Fine. Then tell me this." I stepped closer and watched her step back. "What's the birthmark on his left hip shaped like?" Nikki's face went white. For 1 second she forgot to lie and I saw the answer in her eyes before she covered it up. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do. You know exactly what I'm talking about because you've seen it. You've touched it. You've been close enough to my husband's body to know things only his wife should know. He showed me a photo once. It was a joke. Damien has never taken a photo of that birthmark in his life. He's self-conscious about it. He barely lets me see it." I laughed and it sounded unhinged even to me. "But you know what it looks like because you've been in bed with him." "How long, Nikki? How long have you been sleeping with my husband in the apartment I pay for?" She didn't answer. She just stood there with her arms wrapped around herself and tears starting to form in her eyes. The same tears she'd used 100 times to get out of trouble. The same performance she'd been running since we were kids. "I'm done," I said. "Your rent payment stops today. Your car insurance stops today. Everything I've been paying for stops today. You want to take my husband? Fine. But you're going to do it without my money." "Carissa, wait. You can't just cut me off. I don't have anywhere to go." "Should have thought about that before you decided to destroy my marriage." I walked out and slammed the door behind me. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold my keys. I sat in my car for 5 minutes just breathing, just trying to process what I'd confirmed. My husband. My sister. In my house, on my money, behind my back. And they still expected me to stay home while they played happy couple at his reunion. That's when the idea hit me. Damien wanted to bring my sister as his fake wife. Fine. Then I'd bring his brother as my date. Jackson. The one who'd done everything right while Damien floated through life on charm and other people's money. Jackson had started his own business at 25. He owned his house outright. He'd offered Damien a job 3 different times, and Damien had turned him down each time because he said he couldn't work for his brother. The truth was Damien couldn't stand being around someone who made him look bad just by existing. They barely spoke anymore. Jackson came to Christmas and Thanksgiving and that was it. He was always polite to me at family events, and that was enough to convince me to go through with this. I'd walk into that reunion on Jackson's arm and watch Damien's face when he realized his wife showed up with the one person he could never measure up to. I pulled out my phone and found Jackson's number. We'd exchanged contacts years ago but never actually texted. I stared at the screen for a long time before typing. "Hi, Jackson. This is Carissa. I know this is random, but I need a favor. A big one. Can we meet tomorrow? Please don't tell Damien I reached out." I hit send before I could talk myself out of it. A minute passed, then 2. I was about to start the car when my phone buzzed. "Is everything okay?" I typed back. "No. That's why I need your help." 3 dots appeared. Then his response came telling me to meet him for coffee tomorrow morning. Jackson met me at the coffee shop the next morning and listened to everything without interrupting once. When I finished, he didn't tell me I was crazy. He didn't make excuses for his brother. He just asked what I needed. And what I needed was simple. Damien had spent 10 years making me feel invisible. He'd spent months sneaking around with my sister while I paid for their lives. Now I was going to make him feel exactly what I felt. Paranoid. Jealous. Desperate for answers he wasn't going to get. Jackson was happy to help. The next morning I was putting on mascara when Damien appeared in the bathroom doorway. "You're up early." His eyes moved over my outfit. The nice blouse. The jewelry I never wore anymore. "Where are you going?" "Coffee with Jackson." The name landed like a grenade. His whole body went rigid. Jackson was the one person in the world who made Damien feel like nothing. Their parents had spent 30 years comparing them, and Damien lost every single time. Jackson built a company while Damien couldn't keep a cashier job. Jackson owned his house while Damien lived in mine. Every family dinner reminded him he was the disappointment and he'd hated his brother for it since they were kids. Cancel it. I kept applying mascara. No. I wasn't asking. He stepped into the bathroom and grabbed my phone off the counter before I could stop him. What's his number? I'll cancel it myself. Give me my phone, Damien. Or what? He held it above his head like we were children fighting over a toy. What are you going to do about it? I set down my mascara and looked at him. Really looked at him. This man I'd given 10 years to. This man who couldn't even let me have coffee without throwing a tantrum. I'm going to walk out of this house. I'm going to meet your brother. And when I get back, you're going to give me my phone and apologize for acting like a child. I grabbed my keys off the counter. Keep the phone. I'll get a new one. His arm dropped. Carissa, wait. I didn't wait. Jackson was already at the coffee shop when I arrived. He stood when he saw me and pulled me into a hug that lasted longer than it should have. He smelled expensive, clean, nothing like Damien's cheap cologne that had irritated my nose for a decade. You okay? He asked as we sat down. You look upset. Your brother took my phone hostage because I wanted to have coffee with you. Jackson's jaw tightened. That sounds like him. Does it? Because for 10 years I thought I was married to a reasonable person. Turns out I was married to a toddler who throws fits when he doesn't get his way. He's always been like that. He just hides it well at first. Jackson slid a coffee across the table. I ordered your usual. Hope that's okay. How do you know my usual? You've ordered the same thing at every family gathering for 5 years. Vanilla latte, extra shot, oat milk. He shrugged. I pay attention. Something in my chest cracked open. Damien didn't know my coffee order. We'd been married 10 years and he still asked me every single time like the information wouldn't stick. I told Jackson everything. The proposal story, the almost kiss on the couch, the birthmark slip, the way Damien had been gaslighting me for months while carrying on with my sister right under my nose. By the time I finished, my coffee was cold and my voice was hoarse. I want him to feel what I felt, I said. Paranoid, jealous, going crazy wondering what's happening. How? I need you around. Pick me up for dinners. Text me when he's watching. Make him wonder. Jackson was quiet for a moment. His thumb traced circles on the back of my hand. I'm in, he said. Whatever you need. When I got home 3 hours later, Damien was sitting in the dark living room like a horror movie villain. 3 hours. His voice was flat. You were gone 3 hours. We had a lot to talk about. About what? About me? About how terrible I am? Not everything is about you, Damien. I held out my hand. Phone. He pulled it from his pocket and threw it at me. Actually threw it. I caught it against my chest. There's your precious phone. Check your messages. I'm sure Jackson's been texting you nonstop like the desperate loser he is. The only desperate person in this room is you. I walked past him toward the stairs. I'm taking a shower. Try not to have a meltdown while I'm gone. The first dinner with Jackson was on Friday. I wore the black dress Damien said was too much for a Tuesday. Did my hair the way I used to before I stopped trying. When I came downstairs, Damien stood up so fast his chair fell over. No, absolutely not. Yes, absolutely yes. You're not leaving this house dressed like that to meet my brother. Watch me. He grabbed my arm, hard. Hard enough that I knew there would be bruises tomorrow. I said no. And I said yes. Let go of me. Make me. I looked at his hand on my arm, then at his face. Then I screamed. One loud, sharp scream that echoed through the house and probably reached the neighbors. He let go instantly. What the hell is wrong with you? Nothing. I just wanted to see how fast you'd release me if you thought someone might hear. I smoothed my dress. Now you know. And now I know exactly how to handle you. Jackson's headlights swept across the window. I walked out without looking back. Dinner was incredible. Not the food, though, that was good too. The conversation. The way Jackson asked about my work and actually listened. The way he remembered details from years ago that Damien had never bothered to learn. The way he looked at me like I was someone worth looking at. Friday again? He asked when he dropped me off. Friday again. The second dinner was even better. We closed down the restaurant talking about everything and nothing. He kissed my cheek when he walked me to the door and I felt it for hours afterward. The third dinner was when everything changed. I came home at midnight expecting Damien to be pacing or sulking or throwing things. Instead, I found him on the couch with Nikki curled up against his side. Her shoes were off. Her head was on his shoulder. They were watching a movie like this was completely normal. Oh, hey. Damien didn't even look at me. How was your date? I stood in the doorway trying to process what I was seeing.
My fiancé said, I'm taking my sister to the concert instead of you. She deserves it more. I bought those tickets for her birthday, so I let her go have fun while I dismantled everything between us. When she came home and saw what I'd done, she lost her mind. Hey Reddit, my fiancé decided to take her sister to the concert with the tickets I bought for her birthday. I didn't say anything. Just waited until she left and did what needed to be done. She came home to an empty apartment and a note. Let me back up a bit so you understand how I ended up here. Name's Jensen, 28 male. I grew up in a working-class neighborhood outside of Cleveland. Dad was a machinist who worked the same factory for 32 years. Mom was an ER nurse who pulled double shifts to make sure we never went without. They taught me two things that stuck: work hard and don't let anyone treat you like a doormat. Dad used to say that respect isn't given, it's established. You teach people how to treat you by what you tolerate. I thought I got that. Turns out, knowing something and actually living it are two different things. I work in logistics and supply chain coordination for a regional distribution company. I spent my days managing freight schedules, negotiating rates with carriers, tracking shipments across 3 time zones, and fixing problems that happened when trucks broke down in the middle of nowhere. It was stressful work, the kind that gives you gray hairs at 25, but it paid well. I pulled in about 75 grand a year, which in our city meant I could afford a solid 2-bedroom apartment in a decent neighborhood and still put money away for the future. I met Fiona at a friend's wedding 4 years before the incident. She was a bridesmaid. I knew the groom from college. She was stunning in that way where she didn't seem to be trying too hard. Dark hair, bright eyes, a laugh that made you want to be funnier. She had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room when she focused on you. We dated for 2 years before I proposed. I did the whole thing right. Asked her father's permission, planned a trip to this overlook spot where we'd had our first real date, got down on one knee with my grandmother's ring. She said yes, cried. We celebrated. I thought I'd found my person. Fiona was 27. She worked part-time as a receptionist at a yoga studio downtown, maybe 20 hours a week. The rest of her time went into building her online presence as a lifestyle influencer. She had about 6,000 followers on Instagram when we got engaged, which she treated like she was on the verge of being discovered by some major brand any day now. I supported it. I paid for the ring light, the camera equipment, the backdrop for her photos, the subscription boxes she'd unbox on video. I figured she was chasing a dream, and that's what partners do. We moved in together 3 months after the engagement. The apartment was in my name because Fiona's credit was wrecked from some old student loans she'd defaulted on during her early 20s. She'd gone to a private college for communications, dropped out after 2 years, and the debt followed her around. No big deal, I figured. We were getting married anyway. I signed the lease solo, put the utilities in my name, handled the internet account. She was just an occupant on paper. Fiona said she was lucky to have me. At the time, I thought that was sweet. Looking back, I realized she was just relieved to find someone willing to carry the load. For the first 6 months, things were genuinely good. We found our rhythm. I worked long hours. She did her content creation thing. We spent weekends together exploring the city or binging shows on the couch. I paid most of the bills because I made more money and she was building her brand. I didn't mind. That's what you do when you're building a life with someone. Then Bridget showed up, Fiona's older sister. She was 30, divorced about a year prior, and had recently moved back to our city after burning through all her options elsewhere. She was one of those people who peaked in high school and spent the rest of her life trying to get back to that feeling. Former homecoming queen, head cheerleader, dated the quarterback, the whole thing. She married her college boyfriend at 22 in this huge wedding that her parents went into debt for. The marriage lasted 7 years before he finally got tired of being treated like a personal assistant who she occasionally slept with. I met the ex-husband once, briefly, at a family barbecue before the divorce was finalized. His name was Evan. He told me out of earshot of the family to watch how Bridget treated service workers. Said it would tell me everything I needed to know about the family dynamics. I didn't understand what he meant at the time. From what I gathered through various family conversations, Evan had asked for the divorce, not Bridget. He'd been planning his exit for over a year, quietly separating finances. When he finally pulled the trigger, Bridget was blindsided. She got the house in the settlement, sold it within 2 months, and blew through the money in about 6 more on. After that, she was between opportunities, which was her way of saying unemployed and too proud to admit it. She crashed with friends in her old city for a few months, burned those bridges, then rotated through various family members. By the time she moved back to our city and landed on our couch, she'd already worn out her welcome with 2 aunts and her parents. She hadn't held a real job in months and showed no signs of looking for one. The dynamic was toxic from day one. She had this way of making everything about her. If Fiona had a good day at work, Bridget had a story about how her day was harder. If I mentioned anything about my job, about the stress or the wins or anything at all, she would roll her eyes and make some comment about how corporate jobs were soul-crushing prisons for people without creativity. She didn't have a job herself, mind you. Hadn't had one since before the divorce finalized. But she had plenty of opinions about mine. She showed up 3 to 4 days a week, sometimes more. She'd let herself in with the spare key Fiona had given her without asking me. She'd eat food from our fridge, stuff I'd bought on my grocery runs. She'd leave dishes in the sink for days. She'd hog our TV watching whatever reality show she was into. She barely acknowledged my existence unless she needed something. 3 months into this arrangement, I'd had enough. I waited until one evening when Bridget had left, and I pulled Fiona aside. "Look," I said, keeping my voice calm. "I get that she's your sister, and she's going through a rough patch. But this has been going on for months. She's here all the time. She eats our food. She uses our utilities. Can we maybe set some limits? Like a schedule for visits? Or a timeline for when she's going to find her own place?" Fiona's face went cold immediately. "She's family, Jensen. She's going through the worst time of her life. Her marriage fell apart. She lost her house. I can't believe you're being this selfish." "I'm not being selfish. I'm asking for basic boundaries. She ate an entire rotisserie chicken yesterday. By herself. That was supposed to be dinner for 2 nights. You're being petty. It's just food. I'm being practical. We're supposed to be saving for a wedding. We talked about a venue deposit next month. I can't save money when I'm feeding 3 people on 1 income while she contributes nothing. So this is about money. Nice?" She crossed her arms. "Real nice. It's about respect." I kept my voice level, even though I wanted to yell. "She doesn't respect our space, our time, or our relationship. She makes comments about my job. She leaves her stuff everywhere. She never says thank you for anything." Fiona didn't respond for a long moment. Then she hit me with the line that should have sent me running. "If you really loved me, you'd understand that family comes first. Always. Bridget won't be here forever. She just needs time to get back on her feet. If you can't handle supporting my family during a hard time, then maybe I don't know you as well as I thought I did." I dropped it. That was my first major mistake. Not because I was wrong, but because I let her twist reasonable boundaries into some kind of character flaw. That's how it starts. They test you with small stuff, see what you'll put up with, then push a little further, and a little further. One time, about 5 months in, Bridget borrowed my car because hers was in the shop, said she needed it for a job interview. I found out later there was no interview. She'd driven 40 miles to meet some guy from a dating app, racked up a parking ticket downtown, and returned my car with the gas light on. When I mentioned the ticket, she laughed and said I could probably afford it. Nothing changed after my conversation with Fiona. If anything, Bridget's presence got worse. There was a guy at my job named Owen. He was about 40, worked in vendor relations, and he was one of those people who seemed to know everyone in a 3-state radius. 20 years in the logistics industry meant he had contacts everywhere. Trucking companies, warehouse managers, port authorities, venue operators, you name it. If there was a connection to be made, Owen had probably already made it over lunch at some industry conference. More importantly, Owen was a genuinely good guy. He'd taken me under his wing when I started at the company, back when I was a 24-year-old kid. We grabbed lunch together at least once a week, and those conversations were often the best part of my day. Owen had also been through his own divorce about 8 years back. His ex-wife had cheated on him with his business partner, and the fallout had nearly destroyed him. He'd remarried a woman who actually appreciated him, and came out the other side with a lot of hard-won wisdom about relationships. He never said anything directly about Fiona and Bridget, but I could tell from the way he'd raise his eyebrows during my stories that he saw where this was heading long before I did. About 6 weeks before Fiona's birthday, Owen and I were grabbing lunch at this taco place near the office. I mentioned I was trying to find tickets to see the Midnight Echo. They were this indie synth-pop band that had been underground for years before their 3rd album went viral. Fiona was obsessed with them. She'd been playing their music constantly, had their poster in our apartment, followed every member on social media. They were doing a single show in our city as part of their tour, and tickets had sold out in literally minutes. Scalpers were asking $700 or $800 per ticket, which was insane for a band most people had never heard of 2 years ago. Owen leaned back in his chair. "My brother-in-law works event security at that venue. Let me make a call." I told him not to go out of his way, but Owen was already texting. A week and a half later, Owen came through. 2 floor seats, not VIP but solid placement, for $450 total. Face value. In a market where scalpers were gouging people for 3 times that amount, this was huge. He wouldn't even let me pay him back for making the calls. "You sure about this?" he asked when he handed me the tickets. Big gesture for someone who's got her sister camped out on your couch. I told him it would be fine, that this was about me and Fiona, not Bridget. Owen just nodded, but I could tell he wasn't buying it. Said watching me try to navigate this relationship was payment enough. I kept the tickets secret for 3 weeks. The concert was scheduled for the Saturday after Fiona's birthday, which fell on a Wednesday. My plan was to give them to her on her actual birthday, so she'd have a few days to get excited. We'd make a whole night of it. Dinner at her favorite restaurant beforehand, the show, maybe dessert after at that rooftop spot she'd been wanting to try. Just the two of us. No Bridget, a real date night for the first time in months. Wednesday came. I left work early, stopped by her favorite bakery and picked up a small cake. I had the tickets printed out in an envelope with a card I'd written myself. Something simple about how much I loved her and how I couldn't wait to share this experience together. I got home around 5 p.m. Bridget was there. Of course she was. She was sprawled on my couch in what I'm pretty sure was Fiona's robe, scrolling through her phone with her feet on my coffee table. She didn't look up when I walked in. Fiona was in the bedroom doing her makeup for a birthday dinner we had planned with friends later that evening. "Hey," I said, setting down the cake and sliding the envelope across the dresser. "Happy birthday. Open this one first." She picked it up with curiosity. When she pulled out the tickets, her whole face lit up. Eyes wide, mouth open, genuine shock. "No way. The Echo? Floor seats? These are sold out everywhere. How did you even get these?" "I know a guy," I said, enjoying her reaction. "I thought we could make a real night of it. Dinner beforehand? The show? Maybe grab dessert after at that rooftop place you wanted to try." She jumped up and hugged me. For about 30 seconds, maybe 45, everything felt like it used to. Like we were actually a couple who loved each other, instead of two people going through the motions while her sister ate all our food. Then Bridget appeared in the doorway. "What's going on?" she asked, leaning against the doorframe with that annoyed look. "Jensen got me tickets to the Midnight Echo," Fiona said, holding them up. "Floor seats. For Saturday." Bridget's face went through a whole thing that I watched in real time. Surprise, then jealousy, then something that made my stomach tighten. She pushed off the doorframe and walked closer, actually taking one of the tickets from Fiona's hand to look at it. "Oh my God," she breathed. "You know I've been dying to see them, right? Remember, we used to listen to their first album in my car in high school? Before they were famous? This was our thing." I watched the shift happen. Fiona's eyes moved between me and her sister. "I remember," she said slowly. I caught the look they exchanged, but I didn't say anything because I figured even Fiona wouldn't be that bold. I was dead wrong. The conversation happened 2 days later, on Friday night. I was in the kitchen making dinner. Pasta with a creamy tomato sauce from scratch, garlic bread, Caesar salad. Bridget had been over every single day since the birthday, which wasn't unusual, but the vibe was different. She and Fiona kept having these hushed conversations that stopped the second I walked into the room. Around 7 p.m., Fiona came into the kitchen. "So I've been thinking about tomorrow," she started, leaning against the counter. I stirred the sauce. "What about it?" "Bridget is really struggling right now. The divorce stuff, not having her own place, the job search that keeps going nowhere. She's been really down lately." "Okay. And you know how much she loves the Echo. They were her favorite band before they were mine. She's the one who got me into their music back in high school." I put the spoon down and turned to face her. I could feel where this was going. "Where is this going, Fiona?" She did this dramatic sigh. "I think I should take Bridget to the concert instead of you." I stared at her. "She needs this more than you do," she continued. "You don't even know all their songs. You're just going to stand there while Bridget and I actually connect with the music. She's been through so much, and this could really boost her mood. She needs a win." I leaned against the counter and crossed my arms. "Let me make sure I'm hearing this right," I said. "I spent $450 on tickets for your birthday. I called in a favor from a coworker who went out of his way to help. I planned a date night for us. And you want to bring your sister instead? You're making it sound worse than it is. How should it sound?" She huffed, annoyed. "It's my gift. I should get to decide what I do with it. And if you really loved me, you'd want me to have the best time possible. Bridget will appreciate it more than you will. She actually gets the music." I felt something shift in my chest, like everything finally snapping into focus after staring at a blurry picture for 2 years. "What about what I want?" I asked. "What about the fact that I wanted to spend this night with you? That I planned this for us to actually have time together? Don't be selfish, Jensen. Bridget is family. She's blood. You and I can do something else some other time." There it was. I would always be below her sister. The guy who paid the bills and bought the gifts ranked lower than the woman who contributed nothing and took everything. Something just switched off inside me. "Fine," I said. I turned back to the stove. "Take Bridget. If that's what you want, go ahead." She blinked, surprised by how fast I gave in. "Really? You're okay with it?" "Yeah." She rushed over and hugged me from behind. I stood there, stiff, staring at the sauce bubbling on the stove. Thank you so much. I knew you'd get it. You're the best. M. She was already pulling out her phone to text Bridget the good news. I didn't sleep that night. Not out of sadness, but because I was planning. See, here's what Fiona didn't know, or didn't bother to think about. The apartment was in my name. The lease, the utilities, the internet, everything. When we'd moved in together, her credit was too wrecked to be on anything official. She was just an occupant. I'd asked Owen's brother, who was a lawyer, about my situation early on. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't doing anything stupid. He told me I was on solid ground, though he reminded me every situation is different. The engagement ring was also still legally mine. She'd pushed for us to get it appraised and added to her insurance policy, but I dragged my feet on the paperwork. Kept saying I'd get to it next week. The ring was a family heirloom, my grandmother's diamond reset with a new band. My mother had given it to me with the understanding that if the engagement didn't work out, it came back to the family. It was worth about $8,000, and it was currently sitting in Fiona's jewelry box. Saturday morning, I called in sick to work. Fiona was at the yoga studio until noon, covering someone's shift. Bridget was wherever Bridget went when she wasn't on my couch. I made coffee, sat down at the kitchen table with a legal pad, and started making calls. First call was to Owen. I told him what happened. There was a long silence on the other end. She did what? Owen finally said. She's taking her sister. The sister who's been crashing on our couch rent-free for 8 months. He let out a slow breath. What do you need? I need to know if your wife's cousin still manages that apartment complex on the east side, the one with the month-to-month leases. 3 hours later, I had signed a lease for a one-bedroom unit starting that day. First month plus security deposit came out to about $1,900. I wrote the check without blinking. Second call was to my landlord. Our current lease had rolled month to month after the first year, which means I could get out with 30 days' notice. I called Dominic, explained I needed out now, and offered to pay a full month's rent as a penalty, plus forfeit my security deposit. You sure about this? Dominic asked. Sounds pretty final. I'm very sure. There was a pause. I'll have the place listed by Tuesday. Keys in the Dropbox by Sunday night. Third call was to a moving company that specialized in rush jobs. Saturday evening service while she was at the concert. 3 guys, 4 hours, $1,100. Then there was the ring. Fiona had this habit of taking it off when she showered. She kept it in her jewelry box on the dresser, right next to the perfume bottles and the earring tree. I waited until she was in the bathroom getting ready for the concert. I walked into the bedroom, opened the jewelry box, and took my grandmother's ring. I slipped it into my pocket and walked out. She never noticed. The afternoon dragged. Fiona was buzzing around the apartment trying on different outfits, video calling Bridget to coordinate their looks. She tried on 3 different dresses before settling on the black one I'd bought her for our anniversary dinner 6 months ago. I sat on the couch, pretending to watch TV, mentally running through everything in the apartment that belonged to me. Couch, TV, dining table and chairs, bed frame and mattress, the kitchen equipment, all mine. Fiona's contributions to the place were her clothes, her makeup, her yoga mats, and the pile of stuff Bridget had accumulated over 8 months of squatting. She arrived around 5 p.m. She walked in without knocking, like always, and barely glanced my way. Ready? She asked Fiona. Almost. Fiona came out of the bedroom. She grabbed her purse and headed for the door. She paused, looking back at me on the couch. We'll probably get food after the show, so don't wait up. There's leftovers in the fridge. Have fun, I said. It was the last fun she was ever going to have at my expense. The moving crew arrived at 6:30 p.m., exactly when I told them to. 3 guys in a white box truck. The foreman was a big dude named Ray, who looked like someone who'd loaded 1,000 apartments and nothing fazed him anymore. Graybeard, forearms like tree trunks. I met them in the parking lot and shook hands. So what's the deal? Ray asked as we walked toward the building. Just so I know what we're working with. I told him about it. Then I walked them through the apartment, pointing out what went and what stayed. Everything except the stuff in that corner, I said, gesturing to Fiona's belongings. That stays. Everything else goes. Ray looked at the pile, then scanned the rest of the apartment. The couch alone is probably worth more than all that combined. I'm aware. They worked fast. Within 90 minutes, the living room was stripped. Couch, gone. TV, gone. Coffee table, entertainment center, bookshelves, all loaded into the truck. The dining room went next. Table, chairs, the nice light fixture I'd bought to replace the ugly one the apartment came with. By 9 p.m., the apartment looked like a crime scene. Empty walls, dust outlines where furniture used to be. The only things remaining were Fiona's belongings, and one folding chair I left in the middle of the living room. I did a final sweep, checked every drawer, every closet, every cabinet, made sure I hadn't left anything behind that mattered. Then I got to the bathroom. I took the nice towels, the ones I'd bought at a home goods store when we moved in. I took the shower curtain. I took the bath mat and the toilet paper, because I'd just bought a 24-pack the week before, and I wasn't leaving that behind. I sat down at the kitchen counter, the only surface left in the apartment, and wrote the note on the back of an old electric bill. Fiona, she can have the tickets, and you can have the life you actually wanted. The lease is terminated. Dominic will be here Monday at 9 a.m. for the walkthrough. You have until then to get your stuff out. Do not contact me. The engagement is over. The ring belongs to my family and is back where it belongs. Good luck, Jensen. I left the note next to her keys. Then I locked the door, walked downstairs, and dropped my keys in Dominic's Dropbox. I drove to my new apartment, unpacked the essentials, ordered Chinese food from a place that delivered late, sat on my couch in my new quiet living room, and ate Kung Pao chicken while blocking every number I could think of. Fiona, Bridget, their mother, their aunt who I'd met once at Thanksgiving, every mutual friend who might try to play peacemaker. Then I turned off my phone and went to sleep. Best sleep I'd had in 2 years. The fallout started Sunday morning. Owen called me around 10 a.m., sounding impressed. "So it's done?" he asked. "It's done. Good for you, man. Seriously, that took guts. But you know she's gonna come after you, right?" "I know. I'm ready." What I wasn't ready for was how fast they got organized. Around 2 p.m., I got a knock on my door. I hadn't told anyone my new address except Owen, my parents, and my landlord. I looked through the peephole and saw Fiona's mother, Michelle. I didn't open the door. "I know you're in there, Nathan." She knocked again, harder. "We need to talk about what you did to my daughter. She's sitting in an empty apartment with no furniture and nowhere to go. This is not how grown-ups handle problems." I stayed quiet. The knocking continued for about 10 minutes. She gave me a whole lecture through the door about responsibility, about commitment, about how I owed Fiona an explanation at the very least. When I didn't respond, she slipped a note under the door. "This isn't over. You owe Fiona an apology and the ring. Call me when you're ready to act like a man." I threw it in the trash. The next morning at work, I told Owen what happened with Michelle. He shook his head. "They tracked you down that fast?" "Her husband works for the city. Probably ran my new address through some database." "I don't know. Doesn't matter. She can knock all she wants." Owen leaned back in his chair. "You know what this means, right? They're freaking out. They expected you to cave. You didn't. Now they've got nothing." He was dead on. Everything that happened after that had the energy of people making it up as they went. Monday was more interesting. I got to work around 7:30, figuring an early start would help me focus. Around 10 a.m., I got a call from building security. "There's a woman at reception asking for you. Says she's your fiancé." "Ex-fiancé," I corrected. "Don't let her up. I'll come down." I took the elevator to the lobby. Fiona was standing near the security desk looking rough. Hair unwashed, sweats, red eyes. Bridget was with her, arms crossed, looking like she wanted to throw hands. "Jensen, we need to talk." "No, we don't. You can't just do this." Her voice cracked. "You can't disappear and leave me with nothing. We were supposed to get married." "We were." Bridget stepped forward. "You're crazy. Who does this? Who takes an engagement ring back?" "I didn't take anything that wasn't mine. We weren't married. It was a family heirloom that comes back if the engagement ends." It ended. The ring came back. "You're gonna regret this," Bridget said. "I doubt it." Fiona started crying. "Jensen, please, I'm sorry. The concert thing was dumb, but you can't throw away 4 years over one mistake." I looked at her and felt nothing. "You told me your sister deserved it more, that I was just gonna stand there while you two actually enjoyed it. Those were your exact words." "I didn't mean it like that." "Yeah, you did." I turned and walked back toward the elevators. Security stepped forward to escort them out. "This isn't over!" Fiona shouted. I kept walking. The elevator doors closed. But it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. 2 days later, I got served at work. Fiona had found some bargain bin lawyer willing to write up a demand letter, claiming I owed her damages for the sudden move, emotional distress, and the ring. Owen's brother looked it over and called me that afternoon. "This is garbage. The ring's a conditional gift. Condition wasn't met. The apartment was in your name. She's got nothing." He sent a response letter that politely pointed out, I had 8 months of documented grocery receipts and utility payments that could easily be framed as supporting her unemployed sister. The demand letter went away within a week. But Bridget wasn't done being a pain. About a week after the lobby thing, I started getting weird calls at work. Someone would call the main line. ask to speak to me, then hang up when transferred. It happened 4 or 5 times before our receptionist, Dana, started screening. There's a woman who keeps calling for you, Dana told me. Won't give her name, won't leave a message. Sounds pretty hostile, honestly. I had a pretty good idea who it was. Bridget had nothing but time, and apparently decided to spend it making my work life annoying. Then, the social media stuff started. Fiona posted a long rant on Instagram about narcissistic partners and emotional abandonment. She didn't use my name directly, but she dropped enough details that mutual friends figured it out within hours. The post got about 200 likes and a flood of sympathetic comments from people who only knew her version. A few people from our shared friend group reached out asking for my side. I gave them the short answer. Most of them got it immediately. A couple thought I overreacted. One guy I barely knew sent me a long message about how I needed to work on my communication skills. I blocked him too. Here's the thing about these situations. Some people will always take the other side, no matter what. They've already decided who the bad guy is and nothing changes their mind. I stopped caring what any of them thought. The last thing happened over the next 2 months. Owen kept me posted through his network. Fiona and Bridget had